Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, warshippers of all ages, welcome back to YouTube. My name is SeaRaptor. It's been a long time. I'm way overdue for a quarterly review here, and so we're going to make up some lost time. I'm going to start off here with first quarter 2023, which I'll explain why it's late as we go. I'm not going to get into it right this instant. Let's get into it. But then as we get down to the server data, I'll explain why this video has taken so long to come out. And then, yeah, we'll talk some more about that, okay? So if you're new to the series, if you're new to the channel, about what I like to do is about once a quarter, I sit down and we take a quick look back at what is released in that quarter in terms of content, and then I do a little data analysis. I pull publicly available server population login numbers, right? And we compare those to previous quarters and previous years and just try to get some sense of trends of how certain servers and how the overall kind of population of the game is going. All right. So we'll talk more about the server population in a minute because that part of things is why this video is so delayed. So let's just dive right into it here and let's do a quick look back at what happened in the first quarter of 2023 in World of Warships. So, of course, we started at the start of the year with patch 12.0 coming out right in mid-January. Airship Escort came back for a little bit. That was fun. I really like this mode. It really encourages different ships and different builds than you would normally see in ranked, much in the way that asymmetric battles kind of does as well. So I really like this, and I hope this one comes back and becomes a permanent part of the game, which I believe they're working on. Of course, we had at the time been in early access for the Japanese light cruisers. They officially released with this patch. I don't know anybody that's really excited about these ships, guys. They're pretty underwhelming for me. I mean, I've wanted this branch for a long time, and when it finally got here, it was like, really? This was it? Ugh, right? They've had some of the new branches that have come out in the last few years have been home runs. I'm really looking at like the British and German battlecruiser releases. Those are 100% wins in my mind. But this branch, this wasn't it for me. Of course, we had the Lunar New Year event, same as we do usually every January or February. They added a unique Pan-Asian commander this time around. And, of course, we launched early access to everyone's favorite, more hybrid ships. That's right, the U.S. Hybrid Battleship branch only coming out at the start of this year. We did have a new ranked season, bronze at tier 6, silver at 8, and gold at 9 and 10, and a couple brawl sessions. And then, of course, we also added HMS Hector into the game for research points. At the same time, they announced that free XP ships were basically going to die forever. There were a few of these left. You see there, Eiger, Ajima, Hayate, and Groningen. And they announced here in 12.0 that those ships would be going away in 12.4, which I think is April, right? So they gave you about 3 months notice to say, look, if you're working on one of these things, go get it. But after that, they're going away for free XP. So they'll come in some other fashion. We don't really, I mean, some of them, I'm not sure if they've come back yet or not. I have to go look. But anyhow, and then, of course, some balance tweaks. Luckily, the balance list this time is all good stuff, right? Mostly buffs. A lot of Tier 9 ships. You see there, Buffalo, Dalian, and Sejong all getting little tweaks to their main battery. I could not believe they buffed Buffalo. I was ecstatic. I was just like, this ship is amazing, and you gave it a reload buff? Oh, right? It was so good. I was like, yes, more please. Renown got a main battery reload buff, which I think it kind of needed. And then Marlborough, which is, I kind of have a love-hate relationship with that ship. It got a bit of a buff as well. They made her repair party a little more effective, able to heal back a little more of that Citadel and full penetration damage. And then, of course, kind of lastly not really lastly, but in the balance department, some of the super ship battleships had their little fancy button triggers adjusted in terms of how many hits it took to activate things. All of those got a little bit of tweak there. And then finally, they added ASW to the Dutch cruisers. I don't know why it took this long. It was one of those things that everybody complained about, like, why do we not have this? And finally, Wargaming agreed with you, and we got that added to the game. So that's a nice buff. Most of the things on that list, I mean, I personally don't care about the super ship stuff, but everything else on that balance tweak list, I'm behind it. Let's do it. More of that, please. Yes, please. Going on into February with 12.1, we got early access to British submarines. Yay. Everyone's favorite. I know, I was super excited. Now, this also, I think, marked the first time for me that I remember seeing we had two separate things in early access at the same time, right? Because if you recall, the early access for the American hybrids just started last patch. Generally, those run for 2 patches, and I was a little frustrated, honestly, right? Because this was the start. This year feels to me, and many of us on the CC side of the program have given this feedback to Wargaming, both from our own experience and from feedback we've gotten from you guys in our various communities. Some of these events that just drown you in tokens, right? Like there's you look in your armory and there's like 8 different kinds of tokens for crap going on. Who can keep up with all of that? It's crazy. We just did the Spanish release thing over the summer, the Spanish cruiser line release. There were 2 different kinds of tokens for that on top of it was crazy. This to me earlier this year was kind of the start of the craziness, and I think I want to believe that they're going to listen because it's just too much to keep up with, in my opinion, right? Like I am nominally a heavily engaged player, right? As a content creator, I ought to be, and I can't keep up with it, right? Because I have a life, right? I've got other things going on in my life that's not World of Warships, and I struggle to keep up with it. So, anyways, hopefully they'll make some changes. We did have, of course, the big release event for HMAS Brisbane, which has just recently and now come to the game, come back to the game for Cole. So if you got her earlier this year, you had about a 6 months period of exclusivity there. That was pretty cool. 2 new rounds of clan battles, of course, and a new round of clan battles, 2 new rounds of brawls, and then of course the big change in this patch was kind of a change that I think a lot of people may have missed a little bit of, but they've definitely made domination mode games a little more interesting, right? They lowered some of the starting points. You get the ship losses are not quite as punishing, at least, and so that means that it takes the game a little longer. I think this, we talk for years. Many people have talked about steamrolls being a big problem, and I think that frequently that's because of how the scoring system works. And I think it will be curious. I think it's been curious to watch. In my mind, this has actually made some nice improvements. Of course, we had another round of visual improvements. This is a constant thing with the game. They're always continuing to tweak things. A lot of changes to the unique upgrades. I won't dive into this, but basically almost all of the unique upgrades available for tier 10 ships got some kind of improvement. Many of them had some kind of negative bonus, like you got some bonus, but there was some penalty corresponding to it. Some of those penalties went away, which was kind of nice to see. Sometimes the buff, the buff you were getting got downgraded a little bit in exchange for losing the penalty, but now the penalty becomes a little bit less of a problem, and the upgrade itself offers you something very unique and interesting. And then, of course, last but not least, Z42 got added into the armory for steel. Actually, a really fun boat. I've got a fun clip rolling around out there where I just mauled. I had a little bit of help, but I got to maul this Kagero, this opposing Kagero, or whatever the tier 9 Japanese boat is. I can't remember, but I mauled this thing in 3 salvos. It was hilarious. It was ridiculous. Yugumo. It was a Yugumo, I think. Pretty quiet patch there. I mean, let's be honest. Wargaming has kind of gotten to this cycle now where there's, certain patches are very, very heavy on content and certain patches tend to be a little lighter. This one, a little lighter, with the possible exception of the early access to the British submarines, which again, to me, having 2 lines in early access at the same time, I really dislike this, but it's starting to become more common. It feels like they're in a giant rush to just shove content down our throats when it comes to new ships. And I honestly don't understand. I really genuinely miss the days of looking forward to a new line of ships, right? Being excited when a new line of ships was announced, being excited when it released. And nowadays it's just new patch, new ship, new line of ships. What are we getting now? That's how I am with the Pan American cruisers, which we have barely talked about. But I mean, I don't even really know those ships. I think I have the tier 5 or the tier 6. I've barely played it. Spanish cruisers about the same, right? Stuff comes out so quickly, I can't keep up. It's crazy now. And I don't know. I'm not positive what's pushing that trend. I just know I don't like it. 12.2 coming in March. We got our hot tub mode back, which we've been asking for years. The original April Fool's mode back in 2016 was jacuzzi hot tub battles, and it was a ton of fun. We were so glad to get it back, except that it came with a live test of a new mechanic, which everyone, I'm sure, is going to love, and that is, of course, mines. So I mean, I guess in that sense, it sort of worked, but disguising it this way really felt kind of bad. We did have the full release of the U.S. hybrid battleship branch, so we did have that and going on in the previous, 2 patches of early release, full release here in 12.2. Of course, the British submarines still in early access, to which now we add yet another line, the aforementioned Pan American cruisers now in early access. So again, for like the first quarter of the year, there were constantly two lines in early access all the time. I honestly genuinely lost track of all this crap. It was ridiculous to me. All the tokens, all the stuff you could be, it was just, you'd have to be playing the game 4 hours a day, 4 or 5 days a week just to keep up, honestly. And I don't invest that kind of time in it anymore. We had changes to spotting rewards. This is one of the best changes they've done in so long. And I might have to do a separate video on this. I wish more Destroyer players understood what this means for them. I kind of did a video back on it about at the time where I talked about the return of team play. I had a game with Gearing where I had a crazy amount of spotting damage and I had a ton of XP out of it. And it was like, finally, I'm rewarded for playing smart, not dying early, and getting spotting damage throughout the mid and the late game. And you still see so many Destroyer players throw their ships away quickly, thinking that caps are the only way they're going to get points, and the only way they're going to get XP and credits. And I'm like, stop! You need to live. Please live. You need to live. So maybe there's a separate video there, but this is a great change. Like, of all the changes that have come in the last year, this is 100% one of my favorites. New round of ranked coming in, 8 and 9 at bronze and silver, and I think gold was tier 10. A couple sessions of brawls, and then another round of balance tweaks, right? Now, this one was kind of all over the board, right? Fengyang and Ship Smasher got a reload buff. So did Quantity Kavor. So did Kotovsky. So did Nino Bixio. It cracks me up that we're balancing tier 2 boats. But they do this on occasion. And I'll be honest, the low-tier Italian cruisers are terrible. So anything they can do to make that line a little less painful is a time well spent, in my opinion. We actually had some bizarre nerfs, of course. Nino Bixio's reload got better, but the SAP damage got lowered. And then, of course, I would say, of course, bizarrely to me, several of the Italian destroyers got little minor nerfs there. They lowered the damage on Maestrale's SAP shells, and then Avieri and Adriatico got nerfs to the main battery reload. I love the Italian destroyer line, but it does not seem very popular. I don't see very many of them. The people that do drive them don't seem to really have a good grasp on them. It's another series that I'm going to do some videos on at some point, and I'm just not kind of positive why they felt the need to nerf these. I've never felt like these ships overperformed, but clearly somebody somewhere with data to review disagreed with me. So there you go. All right, let's take a look at some player data. Now, let me explain what you're seeing. If you're new to the video series, let me help you understand how I construct this slide. Down in the video description, you'll find a link to a website that aggregates the server populations of all the different servers in World of Warships, not China. And it basically every day it monitors the servers, right? You'll see a curve goes up as the sun comes up. People log in, they play. There's a big spike, usually late in the evenings. People come home from work, and then as folks log off and go to bed, the server goes back down, and there's just this roller coaster every day. People log in, people log out, people log in, people log out. What I do is I take that graph and I spread it out, and I take an average over 3 months' time, a full quarter. What is the average number of people logged in on a given day during that 3-month stretch? And that's the number that you're seeing here on the screen. Okay, I track that. I've been tracking that. That data, as you see there, that data is still available, going all the way back to the release of the game in open beta, which was third quarter 2015. And so we have a great history of data to look through and compare things to. Of course, you can see the pandemic high here in hang on a minute, early 2020, right? We had a big high point, and then, of course, it's been kind of a steady downhill slope. Now, this is the NA server. Now, we've talked several times in the recent memory about kind of how things have sort of bottomed out here. And I don't know about you guys, it's felt to me, I mean, you can see a little uptick here, which is nice, and I attribute some of that probably to a little bit of holiday playtime, possibly some of the rewards. But I feel like, I don't know about you guys, but I feel like, and we talked about this the last video, that the server population on NA is getting to a point where the matchmaker is starting to struggle. I don't I think this is, and we talked about this, and I'll say it again. I think this is what's prompting them to start looking into um, cross-server matchmaking. As we go down these graphs, you're going to see that EU is the healthiest server of the four that we look at, and I'm probably going to stop talking about Russia. We'll get to that in a minute. But like, of the three servers that Wargaming still manages, right, NA, Asia, and EU, it feels like NA and Asia are starting to struggle with population, and Europe is pretty healthy. This number is not worst, right? You can see all the way back in about a year after release, the game had its low point, and it's had some low points since then that have been worse than this. But we've kind of been mired here for about a year, right? It's going all the way back to early, second quarter last year. We're about to be in second quarter 23, and this number is not really improving. Now, one of the reasons that this video is as delayed as it is the website that I used to gather this data had a huge hiccup. At the end of February of 23, the website that I used to gather this data quit reporting data for NA. It still reported data for EU, Asia, and Russia. It seems like whatever script link it was using to gather that information off the NA server broke. And it broke for 3 months. So there's a data gap between March, April, and May of 2023 that I have no population data for the North American server. I have been trying with Wargaming to work with them since probably March, or maybe probably April, actually. April was when I sat down to make this video the first time. I've been trying since April to be like, hey guys, can I get this data? And we've never gotten there. I'm not pointing fingers. I'm not blaming. I don't think they're trying to hide this stuff because it's publicly available if the script is working, okay? But it's just for whatever reason, I've never been able to get there. And finally I hit a point. It's like, we're about to be at the end of third quarter 23. It's time I get caught up. So what the number you're seeing here for NA is January and February only. I do not have data for March. But here we are, right? Seems to be holding fairly steady. But I still think that the overall population on NA is a bit of a problem. It feels to me like it's just we're lacking. Now EU is in much better shape, right? We see going all the way back, 12, 13,000 average, our COVID high back here in 2020. We kind of settled out in early 21 at about 13K. And they've held fairly steady through that, again, with the exceptions of kind of middle months of the year. It's very common. You see historically, second and third quarters tend to underperform in EU as people get off of school, get off of college, go out, and get away from their computers, right? Do things outdoors, whatever. As the weather is nice, people tend to spend less time at the computer. That's reflected last year. And then, of course, fourth and first quarter tend to be better performers, and you're seeing that here. So EU, for the moment, looks like they're pretty good, fairly healthy. And I think, and I've talked to some of the EU guys about this, some of the CCs like StatsBloke and those guys, they feel like some of this bump is from some of the RU folks that were allowed to transfer out. Now, as we look at RU, I mean, the RU numbers have been bad, going in the wrong direction for a very, very long time, right? You go back all the way to the game's release, very, very healthy, very, very large server. Here we are today, literally, what are we talking about? Like a third of that number. A steep downhill slope for many, many years now. And now that Wargaming has divested this operation, they no longer manage the RU server themselves. This number I expect to continue to get worse. I think starting with the next one of these videos, I'm probably going to just quit talking about RU completely. This is out of Wargaming's hands now. It would be like if I had data for China, right? But I don't. But if I did, that server is managed and run by somebody else. It's sort of out of their control. I don't know. We'll see. I might take one more look at it, but I'm going to tell you right now, this number is never going to recover, right? I get this. I get the distinct sense that the game in Russia has entered kind of just maintenance mode, right? It's not really Wargaming's responsibility to market it there anymore. And I don't know that this number is ever going to recover. I might keep an eye on it just on the side as a side project over time. Maybe in a year, if it starts to recover, I'll come back and point it out and be like, hey guys, remember we quit talking about this number because it was terrible. Looks like the guys marketing the game in Russia have turned things around a little bit, have a peak, right? But I think going forward, I'm likely to quit talking about the RU server because there's nothing good to talk about. And at this point for the last several quarters, it hasn't even been Wargaming's problem. Now, Asia, of course, going all the way back to the carrier rework, had a nice uptick, right? Asia really adapted well to the carrier rework. We saw that throughout 2019. Big bump for COVID. a fall off as COVID sort of ended, but they've held much steadier, in the 8.5 to 9,000 era range, let's say, than they had previously. And they've been backing off slowly, and that trend is kind of continuing. The overall trend on Asia, quite good over the years, but maybe the recent trend not so rosy, going back to, let's say, first quarter of last year, fourth quarter of the year before. Not great, right? But still, overall, Asia seems to be doing okay. Now, in my mind, this number, we looked at, this is 7,400. If we go back to NA was 7,300. I'm actually sort of thinking that, I'm wondering if Asia is having similar matchmaking struggles that we're seeing on NA as well. I don't play on Asia. If you do, and you're watching this video and you want to leave me a comment, let me know. I would love to have the opinion of somebody who regularly plays on the Asia server to whether or not they think matchmaker is struggling to put like good games together. Because I feel that way when I play on NA for sure. This is the previous 4 graphs that you saw. This is all of them overlaid on top of each other. So you can see each server related to each other in terms of how they perform. And of course, for a long time, Russia and EU were the kings of everything. EU finally overtook Russia, looks like back in, probably in middle of 17. Russia's still the second largest server for a very long time, but now finally in the last year, that has fallen off, and to the point where now Russia is, in fact, the weakest server. You can't see this, but basically Russia, Asia, and NA are all more or less on top of each other, and then EU's up here nice and healthy. The overall trend line on EU is actually flattened out a little bit, fairly steady. NA sort of a nice, a gentle slope up. Asia, a much better slope up over the long time, and of course, like we talked about, RU pretty much on the downslope. Now, if you take all of these slides and you combine all these numbers into one overall up and down graph, it looks like this, right? This is literally the total of what you were just looking at. If I total all the numbers up across all the servers, this is everything. So again, you see the same trends, right? Middle of the years, things get slow. COVID was a big boost, and then we're kind of back down here into the 35,000-ish a day sort of average, which is the same low point we tend to hit in the middle of the year. I think if I were wargaming, the one thing, and we talked a little bit about this in the fourth quarter video, what I would be a little concerned about is the fact that we didn't get a fourth quarter bump, right? Almost universally, every year there's a fourth quarter bump, or first quarter, depending on how the holiday falls. But like there's a bump to correspond to the holiday giveaways, right? They give away free ships, they drown you in crates and loot and everything. We basically didn't get that this year. Not because Wargaming didn't give stuff out, but because there was no population bump. That would be concerning to me if I was Wargaming. I'd want to know what was going on there and why, but we'll see. I mean, I don't know if they're going to change their methodology or not. Now, if we look at what this number looks like without the RU data, things aren't so bad. We're basically kind of holding steady. And we're not quite to historic lows, right? Like early 2016, probably summer 17 is kind of the low bar you'd be looking at. And we aren't there yet, right? We're still several thousand players regularly a day above that. More than that, but I mean on average, right? This is not too bad. So I think if I'm wargaming, this is maybe not amazing, but not atrociously bad. You're not super concerned about this. I would be more, if I was on NA and Asia, I'd be a little more concerned about retaining players on those servers, because I think Matchmaker, as we've said, I think Matchmaker's already struggling a bit. Now, if you look at first quarter historically, again, I'm only looking at the game's first quarter performance. Historically, we've got pretty good, and then this, of course, now being the worst first quarter ever. That sounds terrible when you say it like that, but I'm not really shocked. The game's population, the amount of people logging in every day, has been on the downslope for a while. And historically, you get a little bit of a boost from that, the tail end of the holiday giveaways and everything. And of course, as we mentioned, we didn't get that this year. We didn't really get a boost at all from the holiday stuff. So, and then, of course, this very last slide is just recent trends. I like to say, okay, how's the game performing? If we go back, just look at the last 18 months. How do we look, right? EU looks pretty solid, right? These numbers, a slight upward trend on the trend line here. Numbers pretty solid, holding steady more or less around 12 or 13,000 people average on a given day. Their high point is of course much higher than that in the evenings. RU, of course, on a huge downslope, and then NA and Asia not doing so well, not doing as well, but the downslopes are not catastrophic, right? You can see here on the left, we started around, call it 7,800 or 8,000. Asia actually ticked up a bit. NA, maybe a little small bump before kind of backing down. Both of them now around 7,200. That's not terrible. I mean, 18 months, that's over 18 months, that's what, about 10%? 10%? Not even 10%. No, not quite even. Well, yeah, maybe right at about 10% in terms of like negative growth, but that's not catastrophic, and sometimes that's just seasonal variability. All in all, for a first quarter, I don't think they did all that. I don't think the game did all that badly. I still am frustrated by how many goofy tokens and early access events we can pile on each other at once. I think that's a huge turnoff. It is for me, and I have to believe it is for other people as well. Let me know in the comments. I'm actually curious to see what kind of feedback I get on that. And then I think, and I've said this before, I think some of what you're seeing with the, certainly on NA, is just people's overall kind of general disgustedness in response to some of the design decisions that Wargaming has made in the last few years. It's not just submarines, right? People like to point at submarines like they're the giant boogeyman and everybody hates submarines. Not everybody hates submarines. Honestly, I think they're kind of fun to kill, but I think there's been a lot of other things. It's more than just that, right? There's a lot more going on than just the submarine decisions. And it's hard to put my finger on one thing. I don't think it is just one thing, right? It isn't just one thing. It's a conglomeration of a lot of things that I think folks are just kind of maybe a little bit of burnout. I mean, I've certainly felt it. I'd be curious to see if you guys have. I mean, I certainly went through I think I've gone through now 2 rounds of burnout in just the last year alone. Mostly coming on the end of working King of the Sea. So yeah. Listen, guys, I apologize this video was so late. I am going to get the second quarter one done very soon. Here's the catch is, as I was saying, I don't have good population data for NA on the second quarter. The population data for NA on the second quarter looks terrible. I don't know how reliable it is. Okay, so I'm going to caveat that now. We'll talk more about that when that video comes out. Anyway, guys, hope you enjoyed that. Wash your hands, be safe, and I'll catch you next time.